cooking up a lot of top 5 lists for this month and probably even next month as well. And today we're going to be looking at the top 5 best early game towers for TDS. Any towers that are cheaper than $1,000 to place at the early game as fast as possible.
Number 5.
Great on the front lines and great for defense. Into the number 5 spot we have is the G Soldier, or Golden Soldier, I guess, for those people who want to know what G even means. The Golden Soldier, for a long while before his initial buff, was quite honestly one of the best early game towers to place down. Slightly better than the G Scout, and quite honestly the G Scout kind of is a bit nerfed nowadays. G Soldier has always been the top dog for a long while, but then the G Soldier got a big buff. And when I mean big, I mean pretty big buff. Essentially, they just increased his rate of fire, and goddamn, they really did increase his rate of fire when you hear that. Because this man at literally level 1 to 2 just lasers enemies down with, and even with the commander's ability, feels like he's just shooting a fully automatic weapon, and it just feels really handy to actually use. Pretty good damage and a pretty big range, and of course very cheap to place down. Quite honestly, when I first unlocked them, I'd say probably at this point like 2 years ago, I was a little disappointed, but I eventually got around to him for him being the best early tower in my loadouts. But then someone else kind of stole the spotlight, but still to this day, he is a very handy and quite honestly a pretty good early game tower defense, I guess, character to actually use. Good damage and a very good rate of fire.
Number 10.
Boxing their way into the number 4 spot is the Brawler. The Brawler is known for quite honestly being pretty much the best melee tower in this game, and it's no surprise on why many people and like myself actually think that way, because I mean, like, looking at this man's stats and of course how much money he costs to actually place down, it's pretty obvious on why this guy is just insanely good for being an early tower. However, he does have some fair share of issues. One of them, or at least one of which, is essentially a pretty small attack radius, just like any melee towers, but with his small space capacity radius that where you get to place him down, kind of redeeming that for a little bit since you're able to place down more of these guys. Brawlers are able to do a lot of damage per hit attack, and eventually upgrading them to level 3 allows them to push back an enemy with every 3 swings, and of course temporarily stunning them. And of course, when this temporarily stunning animation or action actually happens, you actually do a critical amount of damage. This guy is essentially the Warden and Slasher just mixed together essentially, but he also has an actual ability button. The Brawler is able to jump around the map pretty much anywhere you want him to. Crashing down at the map where you selected him to actually be moved to, he will do a pretty much ground. It's able to stun and deal damage to any enemies nearby. Quite honestly, a very strong tower, and of course early game tower, and it is very reasonable, and of course only be able to afford it by purchasing gems.
Number 7.
Cooking up a meal is the G Pyro into the number 3 spot. The G Pyro, or at least just Pyromancer for those who don't know, I guess, is pretty much, of course, as you can name, just a guy with a flamethrower, and quite honestly, having to deal a pretty good amount of damage, and of course the afterburn damage over time. But we're not talking about the regular Pyromancer, we're talking about the Golden Pyromancer, who's $100 cheaper, which is quite surprising since you would usually assume and be expected at this point that all golden characters are, you know, more expensive than the original variants, but this guy is surprisingly cheaper. A pretty good deal if you ask me. But the stats are essentially the same for like 1 or 2 levels, until eventually later down the levels he just does more damage, a bigger radius, and of course has a pretty sweet outfit, not gonna lie. He is essentially one of the best early tower, or at least early game enemy spam strategies to actually counter. Like for an example, all of the holiday events, or I guess events for Paradox or TDS, however you want to call it. The Pyromancer is essentially good in every single event that it is pretty much a brain dead decision to not take the Pyro, because I mean, like, being able to take down a bunch of enemies, and especially in the early waves of these holiday events where so many enemies with pretty big amount of HP are spammed, this guy essentially can get the job done quite easily. And of course, we cannot ignore the sweet defense melting bonus this man has once you level him up to like around level 3 to 4. Quite honestly, a very good early tower in pretty much every single game mode nowadays.
Number 6.
I couldn't really decide it, but number 2 spot we have is the Crook Boss and the Engineer. Now, a lot of people are probably even looking at me like, what? Why is the Engineer on this list? Well, the Engineer is very cheap at around 750 bucks to actually place down, which is quite surprising for a hardcore character. The Crook Boss is also around 800, just only 50 more bucks than the Engineer. But quite honestly, the cost doesn't really matter too much because these guys are really good. Engineer has always been pretty solid, and then eventually after the big buff, that made her pretty much one of the top dogs of TDS, very high powered, a lot of firepower in every single one of her attacks. And then the Crook Boss, well, long ago got a major buff to where he literally just got reworked and was just incredibly stronger with a much more fancier Tommy gun. I'm a Tommy gun fan for those who don't know. This guy is very good, especially with the good old-fashioned crook minion spam. As long as you have around 5 of them, and you can go up to 5, there is a lot of crook minions that just go all around the map and start blasting at the enemies for trying to get anywhere near their boss, or at least when their boss says to just waste them, you know? Engineer, on the other hand, has always been, of course, one of the most powerful characters in this game, being able to place down a bunch of sentry turrets to just raise hell and eventually upgrading them to have a minigun with a faster rate of fire, and of course, rockets to deal even more damage to enemies and even multiple more enemies. These two guys are incredibly strong, but there's just one guy who is just undefeated in this game. Slightly.
Number 1.
Check this out.
I am mega glazing, but I just cannot see anyone doing better than this man. Number 1 spot for one of the best or even the best early game towers in this game is the Cowboy. I know I've been mega glazing this guy for so many months, but this guy is just so good. The Cowboy being able to place down at around 500 bucks is already a pretty good starting tower, but even better is his golden version at around 600, but has pretty much every single thing from the regular Cowboy upgraded, such as damage, range, and of course the money you get. This man literally gives you around, what is it, like 25 bucks before you upgrade him to level 3, and after upgrading him to level 3 he goes to 50 bucks every 6 shots. And of course, the more you upgrade him, the more damage and especially the more money you get from this guy every single time he reloads his weapons. And of course, you can place up to 12 of these guys, and as long as they're all more upgraded than level 3, you will just be raking in the money. I've talked about how this guy is essentially kind of the replacement for the farm, but as like the farm into a tower, if that makes sense. This guy is very good in pretty much every single game mode for both damage, range, detections, and incredibly amount is the money grind. This man, the G Cowboy, will always be the top dog.
Look out!